Well, here we are. It's another wonderful evening. And, you know, we played this game this evening, right? And a lot of laughs were had at my expense about my inaptitude to move a balloon. And my guess is there are some people, particularly people on my team, right, who are looking at that and were maybe a little frustrated, right? Maybe you were on the other team and there was somebody on your team where you were frustrated with how they were doing it. And you were like, man, I could just do this. It would go so much better. And you get this mentality that says if you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself. Maybe you've heard this phrase. And I think that for a lot of us, it's easy to end up in that headspace where we see something, it's not going the way we wish it would go, and we think to ourselves, if I was doing this, it'd be better. As long as I can control it, then it'll turn out all right. But if I give up control, I don't really know what's going to happen next, and that may not be maybe so good. But the truth is that the idea of when you want something done right, do it yourself, it's not always a negative thing, right? Because sometimes it's a reminder that we do have to roll up our sleeves and not wait for somebody else to do the work for us. You have to do it yourself sometimes, but sometimes it keeps us from trusting other people. And sometimes it drives us to feeling like we can save ourselves. And we can face a lot of pressures in life, right? Maybe some of you talked about that in our connection group time, like the pressures that you feel like other people are putting on you, the pressures you feel like you put on yourself. We have a lot of pressures that end up on us in life, and often I think the truth is whether or not we wanted to name it like this downstairs earlier or in our hearts and in our lives, we do end up being the ones who put a lot of that pressure on ourselves. And talking about pause, we were in this series to start the new year saying, listen, we're all stressed. We're all tired. We all know theoretically and ideally that it would be good for us to take a break and maybe focus more on God. Or maybe you're here and Jesus is not something that's very real to you. My guess is you resonate with all the problems and you wish there was a better solution, even if you don't acknowledge that Jesus might be it. It's a hard thing to talk about. Because we can acknowledge the problems, but the solution doesn't take us to a good place. We don't want to actually admit that maybe we need to slow down a little bit. Maybe we take a break from some of these things we thought we needed and that our life might actually be okay or benefited from them. And part of the reason is, if we paused, somebody might fall through the cracks or something might fall through the cracks. And what if I can't keep it all together? As if our life was ever ours to save and sustain ultimately. We're going to be looking at a really interesting passage tonight in the Bible. We're going to be looking at a passage out of the book of Leviticus, which is the third book in the Bible and is statistically where most people's Bible reading plans go to a dead cold stop because they love the stories and then it gets to Leviticus and like, this is weird, I'm out. We're going to be reading out of Leviticus tonight and it's going to be awesome. Because we're going to be looking at this concept of something that the book of Leviticus is a book that talks about what God's law and his commands are for the people of Israel. And in chapter 25, where we're going to spend our time tonight, God talks about the idea of how the land should have a Sabbath. There's going to be a whole year of Sabbath once every 7 years for the land, the promised land of Israel. That's what we're talking about tonight. See, because eventually we need to let ourselves pause. We need to let ourselves find rhythms of rest. Because you and I were designed to depend. We live in a world that tells us you're designed to be everything, become everything. We're designed to depend. And if you're designed to depend, it means that you and I need to work and practice at being willing to stop, being willing to celebrate, and being willing to surrender. This is what we're going to look at tonight out of Leviticus chapter 25. So we're going to start look at the first 7 verses of this chapter. And here's how it goes. It says, "The Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give to you, the land itself must observe Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, for your male and female servants, and the hired workers and the temporary residents who live among you, as well as for your livestock and wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. So this is interesting. The book of Leviticus is Moses kind of receiving God's word and transmitting it to the Israelites, but they're not in the promised land yet. This is where they're going. They're not there. So God has earlier kind of told the people, like, the idea that you should have a Sabbath for yourself, that one day a week, the seventh day, that's to be holy. It's not for you to work or try to kind of further yourself. You need to stop, pause, spend some time resting, reflecting, and worshiping me. And then he goes further and says, listen, not just is it good for you to have a rest, every seventh year, when you go to the promised land, I'm going to give you this land, and every 7 years, you're going to have a whole year of rest. Some of you were like, that sounds pretty good. I'd love to have 1 year off every 7 years, which for some of you means you've had exactly 2 years of rest that you're missing. And for adults, maybe there's more. I know, math. I'm not even good at it. When you enter the land itself has to have a rest. That sounds good, I think, for many of us, but just think about that. If you lived in a culture that was all about agriculture and like what you make, the idea that says once every 7 years, you got to do nothing, my guess is that's kind of, for some of us, maybe a little bit stressful. It would have been to them, right? Where it's like, well, but if I don't work the fields, then how am I going to eat? And I think for us, right, even with the concept of a Sabbath year for you guys now, like it sounds really good. Just like summer vacation from school sounds really good, but then like 3 or 4 weeks in, like this happens, right? Some of us are like, what do I do? I am bored of doing nothing. I need something to do, which is why you should go to Move, because it's in the middle of June and it gives us a little bit of a jump start. You know, it's great. And then do kids camp, because that's also great in the summer. So, listen, here at Ogden Church, we will keep you from getting bored. It's going to be great. All right, good. So, but if you had a whole year where your job was to do nothing, that sounds great on paper, but the reality is you and me are way too high strung for that. We wouldn't be able to handle that. We'd get a little bit stressed out, wouldn't we? The idea of stopping and resting, it sounds good, but I know you guys. You couldn't do it. Some of you are struggling with a month without checking your Instagrams or your Snapchats. Some of you have people in other states that are sustaining your streaks for you.
They failed though, so it's okay.
Which sucks, but like, that's what you get for trusting somebody in Idaho. I don't know. Potatoes are there. They're commanded to stop and let the land rest and be sustained. And you see, God not only calls the people to a land, but he doesn't call the people to rest, but he doesn't do it for their sake alone. Part of the reason he calls people to rest is because, you know what? We actually need rest. As hard as it is for us to admit it, as much as we love, like, I think what's so fascinating is we get so jazzed about how much we work. Right? Have you ever talked to those people in school? Maybe you are one of those people in school like, oh my gosh, you know, it was so amazing. I studied all night for that test. I didn't even sleep. Yeah, I'm way awesome, aren't I? Why is that an accomplishment? Why is it an accomplishment that you didn't rest? There is such a thing as reaching a point where, like, it's called diminishing returns. You can work too hard on something where actually the harder you work, the worse it becomes. You don't actually get as much out of it. We need rest. We need it. But our culture ends up celebrating. You guys are told you need to celebrate how busy you can make yourselves, how hard you need to work. And I'm not saying hard work's a bad thing, but there's such a thing as good hard work, and there's such a thing as just being busy for the sake of being busy, and that's not good. But there's another reason that God orders the Sabbath year. He talks about it. He encourages it for the people. He gives them this Sabbath year, a year where they have to do nothing, they can't provide for themselves in the direct way, to actually remind them that they don't need to provide for themselves ultimately. That God is who provides for them. They are not able to be their own satisfaction. We can't achieve our ultimate provision. I used to go, when I was a member of the Boy Scouts of America, as a kid, and adult and teenager, we would go on some different trips, and some of the trips we'd go to would be like camping trips, like you'd expect from a Boy Scout. Yeah, be prepared. And some of them would be trips you wouldn't expect, like Chicago and New York City twice. And those trips to New York City were fascinating because it was a trip that was so jam-packed full of stuff to see that you didn't feel like you actually were seeing anything. Have you ever had trips or experiences like that where everything's so full, there's so much that you want to do that you didn't actually do anything? We've got a foreign exchange student here from Germany who's about to head back in a couple weeks. And I feel like but you get that feeling, right? Like, oh, these are all the things I want to do when I come to America. And now you're like, wait a minute, but it was August. Where'd the stuff go? We jam-pack our lives so full of stuff that they end up the things that we actually have end up losing meaning. Hey guys, I want you to be willing to slow down. I want to ask you if you are. And that's something I need to ask myself too. Am I willing to slow down? Because I think we want so badly to be able to do everything that we forget we were not designed to be everything, but to lean on a God who is. And part of that means learning to stop and rest. It's okay to stop. It's okay to say no to certain things. It's okay to take care of your emotional state, your physical state. And I say that, and I want to make a quick caveat here to say that I think sometimes it's easy for us to worship those things too. We can worship rest, we can worship self-care today in a way that's not healthy. Self-care is not achieved through making yourself into God. Self-care is achieved through understanding more fully God's love for you and finding your identity not in what the world says about you, but what God has said about you on the cross through the person of Jesus Christ. So for some of you, stopping means saying it's good enough to move on that assignment, that project. It means maybe not being a perfectionist as much or fighting it actively. For some of you, it means getting adequate rest. It means going to bed a little earlier than you'd want to. For some of you, it means spending time in Scripture so that the anxieties that you feel so often get replaced with truth. We think we can and should always be available and active. Right? For some of you, you've given up social media, but maybe the next thing that you need to think about is, I'm not telling you you have to give up texting, but maybe just think about how you deal with it. Because the idea that you should always be available and accessible at a moment's notice, that's such a stressful burden. It really is. And I'm saying this as somebody who's felt it. We think we should always be available, but these habits wear us down, make us think that we're indispensable one second and then worthless the next, which is a fascinating contradiction, right? Like, oh, this person needs me. They need my response. And then when they don't respond back to you, you're like, oh, well, I guess I just don't matter then. Okay. Are you willing to pause? Are you willing to stop and rest? Not in the busyness that desires our attention, but in God, who saved and sustained you. Are you willing to rest and stop? We're coming a little close on time, so I'm going to try to get through these next 2 points in a succinct fashion. All right, so we have to be willing to stop. We also have to be willing to celebrate. We're going to talk about another concept here in the next part of the chapter. Verses 8 through 13 read like this. It says, count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day, on the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout the land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family, property, and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow, do not reap what grows itself, or harvest the unattended vines. For itself, or harvest the unattended vine. For it is a jubilee, and it is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. So if a Sabbath year wasn't enough, or once every 7 years, we have to stop, we have to rest, we have to reflect. Every 50 years, not only do you have that 49th year, which is a Sabbath year, then you have another year that is also a no-work year. And not only do you not work, everything in the society basically resets. So if you sold property to somebody else, you get that old property back. If you were enslaved, you now were freed from slavery. The whole society resets every 50 years. And they call it a year of jubilee, this idea that it's something that should be celebrated. And I love in the next section what God says about it. But this idea of liberation, it's celebrating what God did to his people. It says, I am the God who freed you. And so listen, this land, every 50 years, we're going to celebrate and we're going to be free. And everything resets. It's a push. Will you pause? Will you stop? Will you also pause? And will you celebrate? Is there something worthy of celebration? Will you let yourself celebrate, or is it going to be about the other factors? And I think so often we get so caught up on other things that we're not willing to stop and celebrate. If you've seen the movie Disney's Hercules, which is a great movie, even though, the gods aren't real, but the heart is, it touches me. It's a great film. And there's this scene where Hercules is training with the little centaur Philoctetes, and he's trying to throw a sword at a target, and it doesn't hit the target right the first couple times, and he gets really frustrated. So eventually he throws it one more time, and he turns around because there's no way this is going to go. I'm just a waste. And he misses the fact that he hit the target dead in the bullseye. And I think for us, this is how we feel. We get so worked up in so many things that we never stop to look and see what God's been doing, who he is. We so often miss the chances we have to celebrate. When is the last time you've taken a moment to celebrate God? Not for what's happened to you, though those things are amazing. Not for what you saw him do, though those things are also great, but just for who he is. When's the last time you've done that? The cross of Jesus Christ, his sacrifice for you, what it meant and accomplished, that is an amazing thing, ladies and gentlemen. But instead of pausing and reflecting on that truth and let it work in us, I think often we try to put the cross on the shelf and move on to something else. Okay, I've got the gospel. What can I master next? We have to be willing to stop and savor God. We need to stop spending our lives rushing from thing to thing without being willing to celebrate. And part of it is not just celebrating God for who he is, but being able to say, wow, I've seen where you've taken me. And some of you got stories where you can look back and you can be like, wow, I have definitely seen God work in my life through this story or that. And maybe for some of you, that's true of you, but because you've never paused and looked back to celebrate, you're not even seeing what's there. We were made to depend not on ourselves, but on God. So we need to be willing to pause, not just to allow ourselves rests. We were created for, but being willing to look and celebrate. Maybe for some of you, busyness is a tool to avoid thinking about how things are going in your life. You're afraid that if you slow down, maybe you have to look to some truths that things are not going as well as you want them to. Maybe there's some stuff at home, some stuff with friends, and you think, if I just keep going, I don't have to worry about that stuff. Maybe some of you don't buy the Jesus stuff, and if you pause, you might have to admit that there's some stuff in your life that's not quite all right. The truth is, while you might find that, and I can still find that too in my life, when you pause, you might just also catch up with the God who's been waiting to see you, and waiting all along, and is ready to forgive you and bring you home. You cannot run that. You got to be willing to celebrate. Let's get through this last point real quick here. I apologize to all parents and guardians in the world. It's going to be on YouTube. Parents, I'm sorry. Verses 18 through 24 read like this. It says, follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruits, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we don't plant or harvest our crops? I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat the old crop and will continue to eat until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. The land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers throughout the land that you hold as a possession. You must provide for the redemption of the land. 2 things I love, and this is what we need to be willing to take away from this. You and I need to be willing to surrender. We don't ask the same question, but we ask the same kind of question, right? What will we eat? If I don't do this, what will I get? God, you don't understand it. If I don't take charge right now, nothing's going to happen good for me. And what does God say? He says, listen, I'm going to send you such blessing. I'll take care of you. And for some of us, we're not willing to trust and lean into that. Be willing to let go. Be willing to just drop into what God has for you. And then I love this next part, which is a little bit cut off, which is my bad. It says the land isn't to be sold permanently, and what he says about that is great because he says, listen, this isn't your land. This is my land. I'm letting you live there, but don't get so caught up about, like, what do you mean I have to give my land back to the other guy? That's not fair. And I think for many of us, in our kind of the culture that we live in, right? Like, we look at this where it's like, wait, people have to return what they've bought and owned, and that doesn't feel fair or just or anything like that. God says, listen, you're going to do this because lest you forget, it's not yours. It's mine. And so what I'm asking you to do is conduct your business for 50 years. That's fine. But then guess what? It's going to restart. It's going to go again. Because I love all of you. I take care of you. What we resist the most to surrender is sometimes the thing we need to be willing to let go of the most. My question for you tonight as we end and close is, what do you find the hardest to pause and surrender, knowing well that that might be the thing that you need to surrender most? Is it your social media, the way that you need to be present and available all the time? Is that what it is for you? Why is that? What could maybe fill the gap? It's funny that social media is something that is a part of all of our lives in a really unique way, and yet loneliness and depression are also rising at the same pace. If we're so connected and have so many streaks and so many people, why in the world are we so freaking lonely? Maybe for you it's relationships and you're addicted to being needed by somebody. Maybe for you it's how you're viewed or what you're able to achieve in your school or your hobbies. You know, the year of Jubilee can sound unfair and we can look at it weirdly, but it points us towards the gospel. And that's what I love about this passage most of all. Is when we look at the Jubilee and the resetting and how unfair that feels, that's the gospel, guys. The gospel is that we got a chance that we did not deserve. When we were in debt, he reset the scales, and it wasn't cheap. He suffered and died for it. That's a beautiful message for you and for me, that we can live into a redemption that we did not earn. Are you willing to surrender? And what maybe do you have to surrender to be closer to a God who loves you dearly? Guys, my greatest desire is that each and every one of you comes to know more deeply this God who loves you. I can't do that for you. But I can tell you that the very thing that can get us frustrated because it seems unjust is the very thing that buys us redemption that we did not deserve on the cross. Let me pray for us and then we'll dismiss. God, I just pray that you would continue to be at work in my heart and life. To pause. To not chase after feeling like I need to be important, but to rest in you. And I pray for each student here. God, I know that in this room that there are people who are just all across the board tonight. There's stuff going on at home. There's stuff going on at school. There's stuff going on with how they feel about you, God. And my prayer is that you would help each of them know that when we pause, you can meet us there. And that you would give us the strength to draw closer and experience more of this beautiful love that you have for each of us. We love you, God. We pray these things in your name and for your kingdom's sake. Amen. All right, guys, I'm so sorry that ran